Hello, this is Jeremy Mitchell, and we are back from an episode of the Libertarian Censored podcast, going over all the posts in the Libertarian Censored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have Massey Hold It, posted by Donald Key, and that's a cross post from the Thomas Massey subreddit, and that looks like a tweet from Thomas Massey, who tweeted, "If you voted for the big beautiful bill, please don't get on here and express righteous indignation that the debt is now $40 trillion. Anyone for room temperature IQ knew that cutting taxes and increasing spending was going to balloon the deficit." And then he linked to an article from FoxNews.com. GOP hold out sound alarm on $46 trillion debt crisis as Trump's big beautiful bill passes House. And I would agree with that. The big beautiful bill is kind of just like the Build Back Better Act that under Biden, or pretty much any presidential legislation in the past, arguably since FDR at this point, the U.S. government has shown that we're going to spend like there's no tomorrow, regardless of which branch of the party is in power, and only a select few like Massey's going to call it out, especially when their party is the one in power. And that's why I really respect the guy. I personally don't really like to vote for uniparty candidates, but if he does get the Republican presidential nomination, I might just have to justify voting for him. Next, we have U.S. retail giant receives $1 billion boost from tariff refunds, and then in parentheses, hooray, more taxpayer handouts to wealthy corporations, posted by Woke Boogeyman, and that's cross-post from the news subreddit, and that's an article from the BBC.com. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is, government corporations shouldn't have to pay tariffs, but if there are going to be tariff refunds, they should probably go to the consumer before they go to the corporations. That's just kind of corporate welfare. But ultimately, the U.S. government can justify throwing money at wherever it wants to. Sometimes, you might not like where it goes to, and you just have to deal with it. Next, we have Homeland Security unable to prove that thousands of non-citizens registered to vote in Nevada, posted by Ninja Lover, and that's a cross-post from the Politics subreddit, and that's an article from nytimes.com. And yeah, personally, I think, it can be difficult to prove that any illegal voters are voting, since the U.S. doesn't have stuff like voter ID, and it has a closed ballot system. So it's really hard to track who votes for who. But I think the libertarian position is, we need to have more transparency when it comes to elections. I personally, for me, we don't have forced collectivist elections at all. We only have voluntary collectivist elections among voluntary collectivists who want to have them. But if we do have to have forced collectivist elections, I do think we should have open ballots so it can be easier to track fraud. Because a lot of people on both sides claim fraud when their party loses, but it's very hard to track fraud since we have a secret ballot and we don't have stuff like voter ID. But you do have to be registered to vote, which is one thing, but it definitely can be hard to track what counts as a fraudulent vote or not. Next, we have turmoil in Treasury bond yield sparks global worries, what to know, posted by Jedi Porcupine. That's an article from thehill.com. And yeah, personally, I think this is just more media hype. They're always saying the U.S. bonds are going to go bad, but it doesn't really matter how bad the U.S. national debt gets, or how much the U.S. government spends. The U.S. government's really just too big to fail at this point. I would say, they can spend like there's no tomorrow. Their bonds might not be as good as they used to be, but I definitely do think they're still going to pay them off because they are just too ingrained at this point. And yeah, personally, if they want to justify, if the media wants to say this, but I personally think it's more media trying to drive engagement. They always have to make a story out of everything. The U.S. debt is bad, but I don't think it really matters because just the American empire is just going to keep on chugging regardless. Trump getting elected in 2016 was supposed to be a massive shock to the system. Yet here we are 10 years later, and nothing's really changed. It just goes to show you, most media stories are just for engagement, if anything else. Nothing really changes in regards to the American empire, regardless of which branch of the uniparty is in power. Next, we have border cops detained me for hours without explanation. They won't tell me why, from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't think border cops should be detaining anyone, or any government agents should be detaining anyone for hours, especially without explanation. But ultimately, they can justify doing pretty much whatever they want to. And oftentimes, there's nothing you can do about it since they have the state monopoly on legal use of force and you don't. And they control the courts and legal system as well, so the courts and legal system are probably going to be biased to them as well also. Next, we have Destroy His and His Family's Legacy, posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that looks like a screenshot from, I don't know, like a YouTube comment, maybe a tweet. I don't know where it's from. It looks like the guy said, though, I don't actually want Trump to be impeached. Bear with me. Impeach him, and he's just a victim again. A martyr to MAGA. I want to see the House and Senate flip, make him a complete lame duck. Then I want to see impeachments. Start with Blanche at the DOJ, then Patel at the FBI, then Hegseth. Strip all his lackeys of power. Then I'd like to see the Epstein files fully released while he watches helplessly. Watch his name drug through the mud with all he screams and reads futility. Watch as any legacy fault he may have goes up in flames. Watch his name go become synonymous with pedophilia. Enough to shame him as yours that none of them will ever live it or down or run for office. That would be karma and fully justified. And yeah, personally, I think that's just more Reddit hype, you know. They've been saying, oh, we're going to get Trump any day now for the past 10 years. But, you know, they haven't really got him, you know. Maybe the 2020 election, but even then he still managed to turn that into getting another term. So, you know, ultimately, you know, eventually I think, you know, they'll move on to someone else after Trump leaves office. They'll move on to whoever the next boogeyman is, or probably whoever the next Republican frontrunner is. And eventually, you know, I remember when I was a kid, it was Texas man bad. Now I'm an adult, it's Orange man bad. Soon it looks like it might be Hillbilly man bad if Vance takes over. Maybe Hispanic man bad if Rubio takes over. I don't know. You know, they'll always have some boogeyman. Trump's just the current one. Next we have, you'll need to learn some Austrian economics, judging from the comments on my last post, posted by your boy Kanzan, and that's a cross post from the Austro-Libertarian subreddit, nothing a little deregulation wouldn't fix. And that's looks like a post he did, a screenshot of a post he did it's not a post he did, it's from Red Scarepod, it's a post from Red Scarepod, and he said, he's got a point, you know, and it's a tweet from Swan Marcus. So apparently Memdotti's idiotic NGO grocery store bondugil now includes giving government subsidies to nearby bodegas to stop them from going bankrupt because they can't be subsidized stores. Dude just gave poor people money for groceries. WTF is wrong with you. And yeah, just go show you that, you know, government-run grocery stores might sound well-intentioned, but, you know, they go against the free market, and I definitely don't think, you know, libertarians should be supporting them. You know, the libertarians should be for as little government control as possible, especially when it comes to stuff that the free market should be handling. Next we have Cost Need Accounting, posted by Donald Key, and that's cross-post from the SIPST subreddit, and that's looks like a tweet. Pennsylvania will now force AI data centers to pay for their own electricity. Residents will no longer have to pay for data centers power. And then this one other guy replied at Malitos or whatever he pronounced it. Wait a minute, why would data centers not pay their own bills? What is even going on anymore? And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is, you know, data centers should be able to, if you want to build a data center on your own property, you should be able to, but I don't think that you should be using government resources to run it. You know, it should be all privately funded, just like everything else. You know, if you want to build a data center, you know, I definitely do think a lot of the data center backlash is kind of a bit Luddites, but, you know, I definitely do think, you know, I personally want one in my area, especially if it's noisy all day, but, you know, if you do want to build one, you shouldn't be entitled to state resources for it, same if anything else you want to build. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, from the SIPST community on Reddit, Flock cares about their privacy but not yours, posted by HarryCut9721. And that's the link to the SIPST community on Reddit, and that looks like a guy talking about, I guess, Flock cameras. And yeah, personally, you know, I don't really care for Flock cameras, but, you know, ultimately they can install them wherever they feel like, and since they're state backed a lot of the time, oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. You know, if you want to take them down, I'm not going to report you for it, but, you know, I definitely do think, you know, you'd probably get in trouble if you did so. And that's my thoughts there. Next we have, I can't see how you are a Trump supporter and are mad at woman who donated to Lindsey Clancy because he believes she's a child killer, and yet you voted to re-elect a child killer who had a 9-year-old girl and many of her children killed in a military raid, and that's supposed to be historical donut 6758, and then they added their hypocrisy knows no bounds, just saying. And yeah, personally, you know, it just goes to show you a lot of people are hypocritical, that they'll say, oh, well, this woman killed her child, and then they'll support that when a guy who's going to enable the child-killing deep state. You know, Redditors have nothing to speak on this, though, because, you know, they supported Obama, who bombed a hospital in Afghanistan, and they didn't. But now that's swept under the rug since Trump built bombed a school in Iran. It just goes to show it's all just they're all really just figureheads. The U.S. government is going to relentlessly bomb the Middle East, regardless of which figurehead is in the White House. I think that's important to remember as well. Also, in regards to the Lindsey Clancy discourse, I would say that's another reason of how tribal society is a lot of the time. A lot of women are going to supporting her, even though she clearly killed her children, because they care more about their tribe because of TikTok brain rot than actually learning the facts. It's the same with the Carmelo Anthony case that happened over in Texas. A lot of black people cared more about supporting Carmelo since he's black, even though he pretty much straight up killed a guy just for pushing him. And it just goes to show humans are going to be innately tribal, whether it be to their race, their sex, or gender, or their political party. And that's why I would argue humans are going to be inherently irrational, and we shouldn't trust them to make group decisions, especially when it comes to stuff like democracy. That's what I would argue is probably one of the greatest arguments against democracy. How humans are going to be inherently tribal and irrational. If they want to justify voting for whoever they vote for, they can justify doing that. But just because the majority of people vote for someone doesn't necessarily make it correct. A democratically elected tyrant is still a tyrant, and the best I think it's Winston Churchill once said, the best argument against democracy is a conversation with the average voter. And trust me, that's definitely, you see that a lot these days. Next we have, do you follow the science on economic freedom, posted by Socialists Are Morons? And they said, economic freedom in this context means smaller government, lax regulations, freedom to trade internationally, enforcement of private property, etc. And their options were, yes, science has found that economic freedom increases prosperity. And then the other option was, no, fuck science. And I am not logged in right now, so I can't see the results. But it's interesting how, the follow the science leftist, when it comes to economics, they'll disregard the science. That, it's interesting. It's why I personally don't really care for the label of science as a whole. People are just going to use science as a tool to set their agenda. And it's personally why I just trust science as a whole. If you want to, you can make a study, say anything you want to, and just go show science should be always about asking questions, but instead people are just using it to push their agendas. Next we have Mike Rogers has asked IPAC not to advertise for him, posted by Donald Key, and that's cross-post from the YAPM subreddit. And personally, I think that's a good idea. IPAC is definitely, you don't want to be seen in bed with the Israel lobby. So I personally do think, it's probably the best if they don't openly advertise for you, especially if you're with the more pro-Israel party like Mike Rogers is with the Republican Party compared to the Democratic Party, even though the Democratic Party is very pro-Israel as well. Although you do have some people who are at least very anti-Israel getting into positions of power within it, even if they might be shitty on all the other issues. At least they're good on not sending all the U.S. money to Israel. But ultimately, I think the libertarian position is, if people want to send money to Israel or Ukraine or any other country, they should be able to, but they shouldn't be forced to do so if they don't want to. We need to. I think we should focus on keeping our taxpayer dollars in the U.S. rather than sending them overseas. And there was another post I wanted to do as well. This was a post I made to the Libertarian Party USA subreddit. I linked to the Wikipedia page for this year's Pennsylvania gubernatorial election. And I said, friend of mine from LT Delco is trying to put the Libertarian candidate on the Wikipedia page for this year's gubernatorial election, but party shows keep taking it down. Help him out if you can. And I added, Wikipedia is a very important tool when it comes to controlling narratives. And then I added in the comments, looks like they blocked him. Wikipedia tends to be very Reddited when it comes to dissent. And it's going to show you, people are going to be forced into it. People are only going to see two options. And, they'll think they have to vote for the two of them. You could add a third option there, but then the uniparty shields say, oh, he's not polling at 5%, because, the polling companies are going to be biased against third parties like the legacy media, and then they won't include any third parties' candidates' names on the ballot. And it just goes to show you, it's a self-perpetuating cycle. Wikipedia says they aren't notable, so they aren't included in polls, and the media isn't reporting them, thus making them not notable, and you get tired of it after a while. And, personally, I don't really care for it, but, that's very much how a lot of people work. They don't want to legitimize third parties since they like having the uniparty in charge, and ultimately, there's nothing you can do about it because they're in a position of authority and you aren't. If you disagree, they'll block you, or if you're on Reddit, they'll ban you from that subreddit, or probably ban you from Reddit entirely if you dissent too hardly. And it just goes to show it just goes to show you. I think at this point, we have to realize that democracy is simply a lost cause. I think at this point we just need to get rid of all forced collectivist democracy and only be run through voluntary collectives rather than the forced centralized collective we have in the U.S. government, especially since the media landscape is rapidly decentralizing thanks to social media. And that's my thoughts there. So I think we're going to wrap it up there. Let's see if there's anything new on Libertarian Censored. Looks like there's nothing new, so we're going to wrap it there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.